I think the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee is ready. We'll be ready for roll call.
Mic test, mic test, mic test. Okay, roll call, Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee. Dr. Beebe? Dr. Beebe is present. Dr. Bofi? Dr. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Harris? Ms. Harris is not in attendance. Ms. Hill?
Present.
Ms. Hill is present. Dr. Moranti?
Present.
Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Romer? Mr. Romer is present. Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Smith is present. And Ms. Heredia is not in attendance. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. And I'm hoping I can do justice to this chair as Ms. Bradford does, so we'll move things along swiftly. Good morning, everyone. We have quite a few public comment cards, so we'll just ask you, we'll call 3 or 4 at a time, so you'll be ready to speak. And then I just ask you to stay with your time limit. You know that if you're speaking individually, it's a 3-minute. If you're speaking for an organization, it'll be 5. So and I hope you don't think we'll be rude if we hit the gavel for you and say, you know, we're ready to move on. But thank you for being here. All right.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 3.1 and removing item 2.3.
So move.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. There's a comment card on consent items.
Excuse me, I have a question. Why are we removing 2.3?
We have a comment card.
Okay.
And can I ask again who made the motion and seconded, please? And who seconded? Thank you.
Your first item is on page 4, item 2.3, consideration of the annual non-public academic classifications report to renew previously approved BESE non-public school classifications and to approve 5 additional schools and classifications. The department recommendation is to approve.
Thank you. We do have one comment card. Sandra Ewell.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Ewell, and I want to speak on the key word, approve. This is my comment about approving 5 additional schools and classifications that are private, which you guys have down here for, this jargon is not easy to understand if you're not really a part of the education process, the annual non-public academic classifications. My comment is that you approve a lot of different things that we in New Orleans are not really privy to. We have a representative for New Orleans, Ms. Kira Orange Jones, who is completely disconnected from Orleans Parish schools. I've been fighting with the John McDonough High School since before Katrina. I landscaped the high school. And I feel that there's an enormous disconnect with Ms. Kira Orange Jones and Mr. John White for the Orleans Parish school system. I feel that you all have silenced the community. You approve many different things, even something as small as a private school, which of course is not half as large as our public schools and our charter schools. I feel that you all should listen to the input from the community, give credence to us as parents, community leaders as I am, and stop silencing and ignoring persons that are stakeholders in Orleans Parish. We love our children, we care about our children, and we feel that we should have some input. And Ms. Jones, you do not even attend the meetings in Orleans Parish.
Excuse me, Ms. Ewell. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think this was germane to the motion.
I think it's germane because I am speaking on the approval of 5 additional schools that we don't even have privy to the information of these schools. And my point is that you approve many things that we in New Orleans do not have information about. I think that there should be more than 2 meetings a year in Orleans Parish so that you all can make us more aware of some of these approvals of the schools and the different issues that concern our schools. There's an enormous disconnect. So that is my point this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there any discussion, board members? Yes.
Could someone just give clarification on, I see that one of the schools is accredited, approved. Are the non-accredited working on Southern accreditation, or could someone address that?
Yes, this is a system that was passed by the board 4 years ago, you'll recall, where we basically granted different types of approval status. A fully accredited approval involves a school that has been SACS accredited, a school that is not accredited but is approved is a school that meets all of the state standards but has not attained a SACS accreditation. The law, neither the law nor BESE rules require SACS accreditation in order for approval, and it's important to remember that this is a decades-old policy in Louisiana that just allows these schools to be eligible for state aid that has that funds textbooks, for example.
So is it possible that some of them might become
Very,
SACS accredited?
very possible.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
I should say, it requires less process of them in their application process if they are already SACS approved.
Okay.
Ms. Bradley?
And Mr. White, correct me if I'm wrong, but this has always been a process. We've always had non-public school approval. It's just a different way of approving them that is more in line with the accreditations that they already have.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion? So moved. Next item.
Your next item was originally a consent item. It is on page 19, item 4.1, consideration of an update report on the Early Childhood Care and Education Advisory Council. The department recommendation is to receive. We have a public comment.
Do I have the motion to receive? Thank you, Ms. Bradford. Second by Dr. Beebe. And we do have one public, Mr. Buckley. Any other comments by the board? Hearing no objection, all those in favor? Thank you, thank you. Motion approved. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 22, item 5.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulations regarding licensing, supervision, training, safety, and transportation. The department recommendation is to approve.
Do we have a motion to approve? Second. And a second. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any public comment? No. Is there?
I'm certain this is to help us deal with issues that have surfaced over the past year when we have found centers that weren't actually licensed, or we had in fact put them on notice and yet they were still operating, and we needed to make this so that we could get a better handle on that. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think it's safe to say, and we certainly will want to bring this to the attention of the new board in January, that since we have taken over the licensing function from Child and Family Services, we have found that neither the regulations nor the statutes really grant swift enforcement when there are powers of enforcement when there are children in danger. Instead, largely the statutes give the courts that authority, which means you really need to seek an injunction in order to get enforceable action. That's a problem, we think. We are going to recommend to the next board that they approve seeking of legislation as well that grants swifter authority rather than waiting for a court order in the event that someone's operating in a way that jeopardizes children's safety.
And if I may add, these are instances that are fairly clear in the violation that has happened. And I think the new board should certainly support going to make sure that the proper statutes are in place so that we can take swift action.
That's
so I
correct.
appreciate the effort.
That's correct. Thank you.
Dr. Beebe?
Thank you, Dr. Moranti. Superintendent White, some months ago, we had members of the child care industry come forward, and they did communicate concerns regarding the requirements for professional learning. And I know this is policy, but are you planning to have continued discussions regarding their concerns, particularly the cost and the amount of time? It's an inconvenience. Maybe inconvenience is not the right word, but it's somewhat challenging to some care centers, child care centers. So, do you plan to have continued discussions?
Yes, absolutely. And the advisory council, which has approved everything that you're seeing here today, was created largely to ensure that there is, outside of the department and the board, a public venue in which those kinds of concerns can be heard. And the Child Care Association has been a fantastic partner. They're at the table in those meetings, and they are supportive of what is being addressed here today. And I want to applaud them, as well as the other child care advocates. They really have not taken the position that, well, you're cracking down on negligent operators, that's bad for our industry. They've taken the position that's good for our industry, and I think we owe them a great debt of gratitude.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bumpy?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the process we have in place to engage with people in early learning centers. I received a note from a constituent who appreciates all that you've done, so that they've been able to give input along the way, and they support this work. So thank you for doing that. It makes the meeting days a whole lot easier.
Thank you.
We do have one public comment card, and that's Debbie Mew.
Debbie Bowe, representing the Louisiana Association of Educators, LAE. I know that the bigger issue is the issuance and revocation of licenses here. And I really don't know a lot about pre-K because I am a high school teacher. However, last year I did some listening tours in schools around Louisiana, and a couple of pre-K teachers did approach me, and I'm not sure that this fits here, but I'm just going to throw it out to John and to BESE board members. Our pre-K teachers who are college certified and have degrees are telling me that they have to take an online training, I think, at the beginning of each year. And they say that the training is really geared more towards the private daycare centers where some of the workers may not have college degrees. And they find that it really does take their time away from their task of actually performing their duties, and they feel that it's not a necessary training for them. So I'm just conveying to you what I've heard from other teachers in the pre-K.
I think that's a fair concern. I happen to agree with it. I think that right now we have a myriad set of assessments that many of which date back from boards prior to this board, and we really need to clean all that out. And we're going to continue to use the class system, but I think the trainings that you're referring to, Debbie, relate to Teaching Strategies Gold. And then when you layer on ECHRS, the Developing Skills Checklist, DIBELS for teachers in later grades, you have a really kind of a hodgepodge of assessments that I think drive a lot of time for our primary grade and early childhood teachers. One of the most important things that the next board can do, I think, is create a seamless system of very informed guidance, but very lean requirements on our primary grade and early childhood teachers. So I appreciate you bringing it to the board's attention.
You. And they just want to make sure that their time is used wisely. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you so much. Any other comments from the board? Are there any objections to the motion? I think that you were for the previous one, Mr. Butler?
This is 5-1. Mr. Your name was called, but you were not present.
My name is Frank Buckley. I'm a concerned citizen from New Orleans, Louisiana. My concern with the early childhood care is that we be careful who we put in charge of overseeing those kids. And the reason I'm saying that because we getting reports in New Orleans that we're having, 3-year-olds put on IEPs, 4-year-olds being suspended 5 and 6 times. And this is early childhood. And I can remember when my daughter was in pre-K and they tried to tell me that my daughter had a behavior problem, she couldn't keep still. And they recommended that I put her on Ritalin. And me being, I said, okay, well, I'm going to take the advice of the person that's in charge of the classroom and try to put my child on Ritalin. So I went visit my child while she was in school. And when I walked into the classroom, she was in a daze. And I walked over to her desk. I asked her if she was all right. She shook her head. She said no. Then I decided to take her off of that medicine. We put her in another classroom. She excelled. The problem wasn't that she couldn't keep still. The problem was she wasn't being challenged. She would finish her work, and then she would start, messing with other kids and trying to help them finish theirs. But because the person that was in charge of that early childhood wasn't experienced and didn't know how to deal with that child and other children, you put them on Ritalin. And then our kids start on Ritalin at 3, 4 years old, and they go on through the rest of their elementary, middle school years on Ritalin. So I just ask that we be careful who we put in charge of early childhood and how we, label our kids, because all of them don't need Ritalin, all of them don't need an IEP at 3 and 4 years old. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries.
And that motion is to approve as notice of intent. Your next item is on page 28, item 5.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111, the Louisiana School District and State Accountability System regarding assessment results and related accountability measures. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent sections 409, 705, and 707, and issue a declaration of emergency effective December 2nd, 2015, for a period of 120 days from adoption or until finally adopted as a rule for sections 405 and 1107. A new copy of the exec rec has been distributed.
Are there any motions to approve as a notice of intent? Ms. Buffy?
Second.
Second, thank you.
Dr. Moretti, can we get an update from Superintendent White in regards to the new documentation that he gave us and the emergency rule? Because she said that for the 120 days. So can you just give us an update of what the changes are going to be?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
So let me just, I'm going to do a quick presentation on this, members. If my staff could help me with the audio visuals, that'd be great. Members, these are 4 policies that relate to accountability and to the accountability system. I'm going to focus on one of them in particular because it's the one where there's been the most discussion so far at the board. The 4 policies are as follows, and I'm going to take them in rank order of from the least discussed to the most discussed, and then I'm going to end by a discussion of the most discussed policy. The first issue is an issue that was pointed out to us by Superintendent William Britt of Bienville Parish regarding ensuring that when an 8th grader in a school that goes K-12 takes the algebra test, that it is counted fairly in both the middle school and the high school accountability system. I think there's been general consensus on this issue. We have a solution that I think people believe is fair, and I urge you to proceed. The second issue is a question of the work keys assessment, which was originally conceived of in a meeting with Jim Fannin, representative from Jonesboro, now senator, and Superintendent Dwayne Lemoyne, formerly of Avoyles Parish, who had suggested that the work keys assessment be administered especially for students on a Jump Start pathway, and that the department then choose the better of the 2 scores, the ACT and the work keys score. Representative Fannin was good enough to amend his career diploma legislation to include this in the statute. The policy you have in front of you treats a silver on work keys the same as an 18 on the ACT. It's a very clean, simple policy. It's a fair policy that gives kids good economic opportunity no matter which score they achieve. Hopefully they will achieve both or better. Third is a question of how to treat social studies in 2016's accountability system. As you'll know, under your approval, we are essentially piloting the social studies assessment this year to update it. That means there won't be a social studies score received this year, and we are proposing to look at the last 2 years' scores and use the better of the last 2 years' scores so as to be fair to all schools in next year's system. I think that has been viewed as not perfect. There is no perfect answer, but it is viewed as the best of an imperfect set of options, and that has been the consensus view. I'm going to focus my presentation today on the fourth policy, which regards participation and the rate of participation and how to count students that did not participate in the 2015 English and math assessments. But members, before I do that, I'd like to take you back to about 9 to 10 months ago. We had just been through litigation that the board had won regarding the right to administer assessments in this school year that were comparable with other states. We were in an environment where this room was packed almost every meeting with people on different sides of that issue. And there was a statewide tour that was being reported on, although I don't think it was well attended, but it was reported on regarding trying to incent parents to not take this year's test. I think there was a concern that there were going to be many students who would not participate in this year's assessment, and you were very balanced in your approach, and you told me that you wanted us on one hand to not cede the ground that the assessment should be administered, but on the other hand, in a time of change, you wanted us to treat school systems fairly. My guidance to you meeting after meeting at that time was, I accept that mandate, but I ask that you wait until the numbers are final, until you make final policy. And so now we are 7 months after the fact. The tests have been administered. We have final participation numbers. We know how well the kids did, and thus we know what the impact on the schools will be in the accountability system. I'm now asking you to make a one-year policy. But members, I want to give you a larger history lesson, if you would permit me as well on this too. Part of your confusion, and my confusion even at the time, was the relationship of the federal law to the state laws on this issue of parental participation. And I think we arrived at the following conclusion. The federal law requires that the state administer the assessment to all students. And at the same time, there is no state law that abridges a parent's right to have their child not take the test. Those are hard things to reconcile. But the federal law to test all students exists for one reason and one reason only. And that is signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965. It is a civil rights law. No Child Left Behind, signed into law by George W. Bush, which reauthorized LBJ's law, is a civil rights law. It exists so that kids that had been disregarded, disenfranchised, and biased against, be they students of color, be they Native American students, be they students with disabilities, be they English language learners, be they the poor, would have a record of educational attainment presented to their parents, to the public, and to the government in a fair and even way. And so that is the impetus for the reason, that is the impetus for the rule as to why all kids are tested. So the question that I ask you to consider today is, A, have we fulfilled our mandate that you gave us of being fair? But I also ask you, keep in the back of your mind, are we meeting the full mandate of the federal government and of our nation for 50 years of administering a civil rights law in a way that protects all kids? And what I'm going to say to you is, yes, I believe this policy treats all schools fairly. I believe the question of whether it abides by the civil rights of all kids is to be determined. And so I'll share with you some facts as to why, if you would follow me on the presentation that's on your screen. We faced a number of trade-offs in arriving at this policy, and I want to commend in particular a couple of superintendents. Superintendent Mike Falk, who worked very closely with us on this issue, Superintendent Carl Bruckhaus, who worked very closely with us, Superintendent Trey Foles. and others, who helped us work through these trade-offs. Trade-off number one, if we count the students as zeros, as has historically happened, sure, that gives everybody a motivation to have all kids test and protect their civil rights. However, it is a very unforgiving policy in a time of change. There are a small number of schools whose scores would be very, very low. Second, you could substitute some other score for kids who otherwise would have gotten zeros because they didn't participate. But remember that that could unintentionally give a bonus to schools where actually those kids might not have done so well. So what if you had historically low achieving kids, you substitute something in, all of a sudden those schools look great when in fact they really wouldn't have done that well. Final trade-off is this. There's a real difference between a school where one kid didn't participate and a school where 100 kids didn't participate. And somehow our policy needs to account for that difference too. So we're trying to protect civil rights, be fair, and treat 1,400 situations differently depending on the size of the issue. Here's what we came up with in dialogue with the superintendents. First, that there is a difference between schools that had 0.1 to 10% of students participating. Most of these schools, not participating. Most of these schools were not dramatically affected by the numbers one way or the other. We needed to seek stability. The way we're going to do that is to use last year's score. So very simple. For most schools, this is all schools but 38. We will simply use last year's score on this one-year basis to substitute for those kids. For 38 schools where more than 10% did not participate, we will not try to calculate a new score, and we will hold their score from last year with whatever consequences come with that. And we will say that it cannot be calculated on a fair basis for this 1 year. So what's the impact of this? Well, as you know, more than 98% of kids took the test, so the numeric indicator, result is not going to be that great. This doesn't have a huge impact overall. 34 schools, I spoke wrong, will receive the same score they received last year. So 34 schools are the ones out of 1,156. 34 will have a real impact of the policy. So if that's true, that out of 1,156 schools, 34 are really impacted, the question is, in those 34, did we protect the civil rights of those kids? And I will draw your attention to a couple of these facts. 4 of those schools received a D or an F last year. So I think there was some kind of notion before that these were schools that were largely successful, that were serving maybe upper income kids, and so on and so forth. I would tell you that at least in 4 cases, the records show that a large number of kids opted out, even though the school was a D or F school, meaning that there is the possibility that someone saw some advantage somewhere in not having a set of kids test in schools that the state has deemed to be struggling schools. Second, there were 3 schools that were new and thus have no student record before at all that fall into this category. So we, as the governmental elected or appointed overseers of this school system, have 3 schools where there's no verifiable record. So the question at the bottom asks, does the policy fairly balance the trade-offs that I articulated before? And I think the answer is largely in this 1-year period, from my opinion, yes, it does. However, to protect the civil rights of low-income kids, of students with disabilities, of people of color, I have a hard time advocating to you and will to future boards that it should be sustained, because I do not believe that in the instances of the 4 schools that have historically failed, in the 3 schools where there is no record of those schools' performance whatsoever, that we can guarantee you, the citizens and the taxpayers, that we have fairly protected the civil rights of those kids. So I encourage this passage. I encourage you pass the policy, but with the reservation that repeating it in future years, I believe, risks similar complications. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any comments?
Thank you. I support the efforts, Mr. Superintendent. Let me just try to understand this. So let's take the opposite end. If a school had a large number of high-performing students that opted out, and when I say a large number, did we have any that actually fell in that 10% range where they're better performing students?
We had some A schools too,
Okay.
yes. Now, I would say this, we've looked at studies to show, to see whether or not the kids who opted out are above average or below average, because I think there was a lot of talk about this. And they were essentially average. For their school, they were the average kid in terms of their test score performance.
Okay, and so, and again, I appreciate the effort to try to help those schools that, how do we address in the future, and I know this is going to be the decision of another board, but how do we address something that's almost a variable that we can't control? If parents continue to choose to opt out, how do we still meet the concerns of addressing the needs and civil rights of students, but still not punish schools? I mean, that's a hard combination to address.
Well, I think the board's going to have to wrestle with it, but I think you have to wrestle with it on a case-by-case basis. I think the circumstances had never presented themselves in the 20 years prior to in the way they did last year, and yet when you really look at it, the statistical difference from last year to the years before actually wasn't very great. So I'm going to encourage the board to look at the facts as they exist in that testing cycle and to make a decision based at that moment in time on the same question. But what I would say is, I think the more you create the impression that it is expected that people will not participate, the more you risk large numbers of people not participating. And the more you run that risk, the more you risk civil rights. Is there a perfect answer to this question? Absolutely not. But I'm going to encourage the board to abide by historical policy that protects student rights, while at the same time knowing that in this time of transition, you have asked us to create a policy that is, in a time of transition, as fair as possible, and I believe we've brought that to you in large part on the advice of school superintendents and others.
Thank you. I think the superintendents are real pleased with the process. Thank you.
Superintendent White, can you talk us through the social studies transition again?
Sure. In 2011, before most on sitting here today, including myself, were on this dais, the Department of Education conducted its once every 7-year legally mandated review process of the social studies standards and updated the standards. And the standards that were passed in 2011 are much less rote memorization based, much more critical thinking, analysis, and writing based. There was broad support from social studies teachers for doing so. However, the state never adjusted the assessment to measure those standards, and I think therefore in large part those standards have never been taught. That is now happening. And at the same time, when you run a test for the first time, you have to give it a dry run. So this year's test in social studies will be voluntary. School systems may choose to participate, and it will not be counted in the accountability system because it is scored only on the basis of whether or not kids were able to, what they demonstrated on the questions, and we're not really looking for kids to score individually. We're just testing out the questions more than we're testing out the kid. So there's a question. How do you count social studies? And there are trade-offs. On one hand, you don't want to disrespect social studies and its place in the system. If you did that, you would be disregarding a highly important piece of learning, something that makes schools either high quality or not. And at the same time, you don't want to create the impression that something that wasn't learned this year counts in the accountability system. So what we've proposed to do is to say we're going to represent social studies in the school and in SCORE. We're going to use the better of the last 2 years' scores as a way of representing it. It has an impact on the average school performance score of 0.1 SPS. So the only adjustment, it has a 0.1 adjustment in the SPS.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Beebe.
Superintendent White, Does that apply to individual schools, or would it be a district-wide decision?
It would be both, Dr. Beebe.
So you would have the autonomy to make the choice. So if there are 2 or 3 schools within the district which would choose to use 13, 14 for, then that's accepted.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And so, for clarification, so a school district can make the decision, I guess, district-wide, that they will participate in the testing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then they can also develop their own, they're going to be developing their own test at the local level?
No, this is going to be a statewide assessment, and we're trying out the questions. They don't have to participate, but they can.
So if they participate, they're going to take a test that everybody else is taking in the state, so it's going to be comparable.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Any other board comments?
I have one small question, Superintendent. On the 4 schools that had scored a D or F, were those schools in a particular district, or were they spread out across the state?
Spread out.
Okay, thank you.
We do have 6 public comment cards, and I'd like to invite Michael Falk, Frank Buckley, and Mary Juna to the mics, and then have Donald Chauvin, Lee Barris, and Deborah Schum to be in readiness. Thank you.
Morning, Madam Chair. My name is Michael Falk. I'm Superintendent of Schools, Central Community School System, and probably was the most vocal in this area of the opt-outs. I had both situations. We had a school that had 11.8% opt-out. We had another school that had 5.8%. And I must say that the department and the staff opened up to very constructive discussions. Some of them were held late in the evening, some of them were held over the weekend. And as we worked through this, I believe that the department has come up with what could be the fairest proposal for all parties concerned. And I believe that it allows us some time to address the issues locally, because we faced a brush fire 3 to 4 days before the testing even started. Miscommunication, misinterpretation. Principals were working with parents one-on-one, trying to talk to them. And it impacted the testing environment at those 2 schools immensely, especially with the one school that had over 10%, because the students did attend school that day who opted out, and we had to provide for those students. We had to have additional staff because we had to make sure that the test security was still maintained. So I feel that in that area, that is the fairest that we could have come up with, the least punitive, if you could call it that, to schools, to teachers who worked hard all year long teaching the children in the class, and then 2 days before the test that will be administered, boom. And we did an analysis of the results. And 65% of the students who opted out in our district scored mastery and advanced. 65%. We had a lot of students who opted out that the parents did not know what they were doing, but they requested, so we honored their request. And I guess one question to follow up, along with Ms. Bofi, referring to social studies. Superintendent White, we had a provision in there for the assessment and the calculation for students who did not have previous year scores. How would that be handled with the social studies if you had students who had not had previous social studies scores?
Well, we're not, this is a little bit different, than we're just using the assessment index of the entire school rather than the scores of each individual child.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Mr. Buckley. Oh, I'm so sorry.
So Mike, did you have any students that say opted out of the first test and then
Yes.
took the second? And then how do we relate? How does that all come together?
And I believe that the way the scenario is if they did not take all of the tests, then there's a provision in the policy. I read the policy, so there's a provision there. Actually, I had one student take the first part of the test, didn't take the second part, but still overall scored basic. I mean, that blew me away, but we did have some, and it was primarily when we got to the math portion of the test that they opted out. They may have taken the English language arts portion, but then when the math portion came out, they opted out. And we really, I felt, performed pretty well on the math portion because of the math instruction we've been giving since we started as a school system.
Did you change anything for next year with regards to your math?
No, ma'am.
district-wide?
It's the same series that we started when we started as a school system 9 years ago. It's based on problem solving, higher order skills, and it was rough at the beginning. So a lot of districts that faced those challenges when we shifted as a state, we had already gone through that with our teachers and our parents and our students longitudinally had developed those skills, so we were in pretty good shape in that area.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Buckley.
Okay, Frank Buckley, Concerned Citizens of New Orleans. There was a Title VI civil rights complaint that was filed against John White, the BESE board, and the Louisiana Department of Education from New Orleans on how African-American children were treated in the Recovery School District. And John White called the complaint a joke. So when I'm sitting here listening to John White talk about civil rights, and I'm like, talking about civil rights, and you just called a Title VI complaint filed against you a joke. Then we talk about school districts opting out for testing. There were two school districts, Jefferson Parish, the school that I taught at, and there were schools in New Orleans where the parents didn't know anything about opting out. When we were going through our orientation for testing, I'm asking the testing coordinator, are we going to inform parents that they have an option of opting out? That question was never answered, and the letters never went home for parents to opt out. Then you have these schools, these charter schools that have great grades, and you have teachers that have signed contracts stating that they will not talk about what happens in that school. So they don't come forward and tell you what's going on, but they tell me. And there was one school, KIP, where there was 3 groups of students. The students that had the test read to them, the students that did the test on their own, and the students that they just pulled out of class and put somewhere else. And you look at the results, KIP scores are going up. Now, 8th grade Matt Park last year. The raw schools that I read, they said it was like 27%. That was the average of the score, 27%. That was before the BESE or John or the Department of Education put their curve on it. So, and every student that was in the 8th grade last year moved on to 9th grade. And I'm sitting in the 9th grade class now, and I got kids in the 9th grade that can't multiply 1-digit numbers. Then we have SLTs. You want us to fill out SLTs where the teacher job is based on student learning targets, but we don't have no data. I can't even see the results of my kids' scores. I'm asking, when are we going to get to part schools? When will I see how my kids done on part? Now they're telling me we won't. But you want us to create SLTs based on students' test scores. And I'm listening to you talk, John, and I'm listening to the BESE board members ask questions, and your response is, I think. We don't need you to think. We need you to know. Our kids are suffering while you just sitting up here thinking. They're not learning. They're being pushed through a system. And especially in New Orleans, we wonder why the crime is the way it is, because you have failed to educate our kids. And all we worried about is test scores, when we are manipulating test scores. In 2009, I personally told you that there was cheating going on at the school that I was working at. When you used the superintendent of RSD, and you said you weren't going to investigate. So now you went from not investigating schools as an RSD superintendent to manipulating schools as a superintendent of the Department of Education. Atlanta, Georgia, teachers were arrested for cheating on a test. But in Louisiana, we have a state superintendent that are manipulating test scores, and a BESE board that's sitting behind him support him. And our kids are not learning, not just in New Orleans, Louisiana. And he's thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Appreciate that. Mary, do you know?
Well, it needs to be said that his statement's not true. I mean, I'll make a comment. I mean, I'm glad to have everybody give testimony. It's part of what we do. But when you come up and insinuate that there's been an artificial manipulation and we're doing what they were doing in Atlanta, Georgia, this is not a true statement. So I appreciate your time and I appreciate you being here. But let's make sure we stick to the facts. And those aren't the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mary, do you know? No. Mary, do you know?
Good morning, Superintendent and BESE members. My name is Mary Juneau, and I'm a parent of 3 children in East Baton Rouge Parish School System. Today I want to tell you a little bit about how testing impacts my middle child. And I want you to know that I appreciate that you've asked if you have fulfilled your mandate and that you would like to be fair to our schools. I am a former teacher, as Ms. Bradford is aware, and I have been very active in supporting our schools because, frankly, we love our schools. And I certainly love my children, and my husband and I want them to receive the best education possible in a diverse environment that challenges them and nurtures them. And as Mr. Romer knows, because he's my representative, that we truly believe that is happening for our children in the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. We really try to do our part, Jason and I, as parents, to offer the support that kids need to be successful. But the sad truth is, those of you who are social workers, who are superintendents, who work in our school systems know that many children come from very broken homes where there is poverty and violence that they face daily. And to expect them to perform the way my 5th grader, now 6th grader, Sammy performed is unrealistic. Last year was a bit chaotic with Park, Leap, and then as he entered middle school, he had to take another assessment to see which math class he could be in, because children are taught at their own level in math, as you know, in our school system. So because he's a laid-back child, and because we love our schools, we did not opt out. We knew that all the testing wouldn't stress him because I asked him. And he said, no, it's annoying because it does take away from what we do in class. There's a lot of wonderful projects. There's a lot of great teaching. Today he's bringing a Lego model of a Coliseum, a gladiator ring that he made for history class, and he's giving a speech. But last year, okay, so he took his test. 7 months later, we got the Park scores. In June, we got the LEAP scores. So in June, he made advanced in mastery, and I'm not bragging, I'm just letting you know. When I got the Park scores recently, he had a 5 and a 4. But I want to know from you, how is this formative or summative? How does it summarize and let me know as a parent, well, what did he actually learn in 5th grade? So in the summer, if he needed tutoring, like what if he had made a 2? If he needed tutoring, I've lost my window of opportunity to actually help him, right? Because I'd be unaware. So how is this a valid instrument for kids individually when it comes 7 months later? Craigslist was looking for people to hire for the Pearson Corporation to grade. which is disturbing as a parent. So that's one question I have.
I think we need to start wrapping it up now, Ms.
Oh, sorry. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. I appreciate that you don't want to count the score against 34 schools, but I'm asking you not to count it against the 1,156 schools because of the chaos, because of the lack of notification. I'm asking you to really consider the civil rights of kids with disabilities. My kids thrive with the extra rigor of being 2 grade levels ahead, but that's not developmentally appropriate. It's certainly not developmentally appropriate for kids who have learning differences and cognitive problems.
Thank you,
So
Ms.
please don't
Juneau.
penalize our schools for this transition, as you call it.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Just a point of order, if you don't mind. When we start the public comments, we will not be accepting any additional cards. So if you have something that you want to say on an item, please make sure you have your cards in before we begin the public comments. Thank you so much. Mr. Showpit.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the opportunity to come before you all. I'm here first and foremost as a parent and grandparent, second as a representing the voice of the ex-offender. So I would appreciate all 5 of my minutes. I have a lot to say. I've been studying LEAP and fighting LEAP from day one. For this reason, my research, I'm not perfect, but I do my homework. My research on LEAP was that it was started originally as a assessment of teachers. It was designed to see what teachers were teaching and measuring what students were learning so that they can improve their teaching technique. It was supposed to be diagnostic, not punitive. But teachers, being security conscious, decided that you're not going to test me with this program. We're going to test the students. We're going to make it a student test and make it punitive. If they don't pass this test, then they can't pass. This is the outcome of that line of thinking. You have kids who are being tested for LEAP, and the promotions is predicated upon the results of LEAP. Yet the courses, the subjects that's being asked them on LEAP were not covered in class in a fundamental way for them to learn the basics of the subject. If anything, they were taught to study for the tests with no fundamental knowledge. That's why the schools are so low. They weren't taught fundamentals. They were forced to be guinea pigs to protect teachers' jobs, and they were graded according to how they made out on that test, which is very, very stressful. I'm convinced that some teachers couldn't pass the LEAP test. I know for a fact President Bush couldn't pass it. So this is the dilemma. And I'm saying this because I have 9 children in all these parish schools and in Baton Rouge schools after the hurricane. And I've been a very active parent at every school my children went to. So I saw the system. I saw the change in attitude, the change in atmosphere from when I was going to school and my parents would welcome every school I went to. And when I go to see about my kids, I'm treated like an invading army. The whole atmosphere changes when I walk into the building. And the atmosphere is, why are you here? What do you want? Getting back to the LEAP. We went from LEAP to high stake test and Common Core, which is only a modification of the LEAP, because you still aren't teaching the basics in those classrooms. This is my question. What were we taught, those who went to school, before you had LEAP and and Common Core? What was the standard of measurements in the system of teaching people like me and those before me? What you had was grade-appropriate learning. Those kids who go to the best schools, the ones who can opt out of LEAP, they're getting grade-appropriate learning. They are the only people in the state that can really pass the LEAP test because they're getting grade-appropriate learning. but they are exempt from taking LEAP. Private schools are exempt from taking LEAP. And all schools that are religious are exempt from taking LEAP. So the only folks penalized with the LEAP test are your public schools. The reason that you don't have social studies in school, and if you do, it's very, very limited, is because inside social studies you have something called civics. My favorite subject in school was civics. It taught me governance. It taught me the importance of governance and my responsibility towards governance. It taught me to be loyal to my leaders and to make sure my leaders were loyal to me, because I had a report card on my leaders. The change agent for all education historically in this country has come from one source: students. That's why you're going to teach them social studies. And that's why you don't have civics in your classrooms right now. Because when those kids wake up and realize what you are doing to them, they're going to ask you, me, and everybody in this room, what did you know? When did you know it? And what did you do? And Mr. White, I hope one day when you're walking down the street and somebody calls you by your name that you don't recognize, and they look at you and ask you that question, I'll pray to God for you. You have the right answer.
Thank you, Mr. Sherpin. Ms. Barrios.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it as long as Superintendent White asks the public to believe that the federal government requires that every student take the test. It's obviously an implication rather than a reality, because there is no law that parents have to allow their students to take the test. Many other states even have laws or policies that allow parents up front to opt out of taking the test. New York State is huge in the opt-out movement. There have been no penalties from the federal government because you cannot require a student to take the test. The civil rights issue is one of accessibility. Yes, every school has to offer and make available and accessible the test to every student. If anything, applying high stakes, which every state doesn't do, apply high stakes accountability to their state assessment. If anything, it creates a disparate impact for students in poverty, which of course applies heavily toward minorities. It was Superintendent White who wrote into the ESEA waiver, with the approval of BESE, who I'm not sure everyone actually read it, that he would assign double zeros in English and double zeros in math for every non-tested student. Now he realizes he really can't do that because we did have a good number of opt-outs. So the public needs to understand that they do have a right to opt out. Why would they do that? Parents do not want a bogus test score on their student's permanent record. The ever-changing tests, the ever-changing standards, the ever-changing curriculum, of which there is no state curriculum. Therefore, the high stakes is unreliable and invalid. So many parents, and the lowering of the cut scores, the changing of the cut scores, this just adds another layer of meaninglessness to our high stakes accountability. What needs to be addressed is the accountability system. This state, this BESE board, this Department of Ed needs to seriously create a valid accountability system. Many states do, and there's a movement toward that. So I'm sure you're probably going to accept this because it does sort of take away the supposed consequences of these of these schools that had so many opt-outs. But it is meaningless, and I think the public needs to understand how meaningless it is. It adds another layer of meaningless to this accountability system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. And the last two public comments would be Deborah Plum and Sean Fleming. If you would come forward, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question is, we have these policies that are actually being approved or suggested for approval today by BESE, and none of these items have been specifically given to the Accountability Commission. The Accountability Commission was supposed to meet in October. That meeting was canceled, and we now have a meeting on Friday. And I say that because specifically on the information on the social studies test, when we were going to have the meeting in October, I had sent in a recommendation to consider two different suggestions. One was to average the last 4 years, which is when the new when those standards had come in, or use the test scores from last year for social studies and have that be whichever is higher. That's not exactly what the policy says. I'm not saying I'm in disagreement with it. What I am concerned about is why we have an accountability commission that does not get a chance to discuss the standards before it's presented and put into the policy bulletin. Because I thought that was the purpose of the commission, was to make recommendations to BESE on what those specific policies would be. If we had had the meeting as scheduled in October, then to me we would have had a chance to discuss this. I'm really unclear as to why we are having a meeting on this Friday for Accountability Commission when the policies that are really important and talk about what the accountability laws and policies should be is being passed at the meeting on December 1st and December 2nd. And as a member of the commission, I'm asking for a point of clarification. Why was this not provided to the commission prior to it being sent here? And if it was due to a deadline, then why didn't we just move the commission meeting to an earlier date so that it happened prior to this BESE meeting? And in conjunction with that, I saw another part of the policy that was going to change is about the ACT using work keys, which I think is a really good idea, and I also think the idea about using ACT, but my question is, who's paying for that? Do districts get a chance to have both tests paid for? Is it one test? And I say that here because if this had been brought to the Accountability Commission, I could have asked all those questions there. We could have had it vetted. And it's not that I'm saying I'm in disagreement with all of the policy, but I have a strong issue with us having commissions that are supposed to be providing information and vetting the information before it becomes policy, having a meeting after important policy like this actually gets adopted.
Just a point of clarification. Remember, the motion is to approve for the notice of intent, so you still have that opportunity to do that.
But once
Debbie,
yes.
Can I clarify some facts?
Yes.
Thank you. As I recall, and you're on the commission, I'm not, but social studies was discussed in June, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's one of the policies that was discussed. Second, I think you're right that work keys wasn't discussed, but with respect to your concerns about who pays for work keys, that policy was instituted 2 years ago after I did a statewide tour of public meetings, after it was adopted at BESE, after it was heard in both chambers of the legislature, and the state pays for it. So that's all been taken care of years ago. So that's 2. 3, with respect to participation, I think you're right. But it's an issue of simply timing. And we said this from the time that this happened. The results came back late this year, and the reason is it was a field testing year. This is the first public venue in which we could discuss it after the results came back. We're at the Superintendent's Advisory Council. Were you in attendance at the Superintendent's Advisory Council?
No, I was not.
Okay. But ma'am, if I could.
Yes.
It is a public meeting, correct?
Correct.
So it is fair to say that this policy was vetted at a public meeting as soon as the test results came back. Is that right?
I wasn't there, so I can't say.
It is right. So I think you're coming up and you're saying that all these things weren't vetted. But in fact, they were. And frankly, you know very well, and you have my cell phone. If you have a concern about these things, just pick up the phone and call me. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to get the calendaring right, but we're on a very tight timeline. I think your first 2 issues you're just wrong on, and your third one is a regrettable issue of circumstances, and we've done everything possible to try to allay them, including hosting public meetings that you didn't attend and giving cell phone numbers that you never called.
So if I could just respond very quickly. I'm not in disagreement with the necessary policy. I'm saying, why do we have the Accountability Commission meeting this Friday when if this policy was going to come up this board meeting, why, and we had one scheduled in October that did not occur.
We
And
wouldn't have had the results in October,
but-
and you're right, the meeting was scheduled this Friday. We don't schedule meetings on a month-to-month basis. We schedule them years out. When the results came back, we brought it to the first public meeting we possibly could. It's a regrettable circumstance, but I have to tell you, if you really have these concerns, I really would appreciate you just giving me a call and saying, hey, why don't we adjust this meeting time? I've never heard from you. Okay?
Thank you, Ms. Shaw.
Dr. Moran.
Oh, yes.
I would like to say, Superintendent White, in defense of Ms. Shum, and she doesn't need me to defend her, but it's not her place to call you or to call BESE. She made a valid point. The Accountability Commission is in place to vet these policy proposals, and I just think it's unfair for you to at least place the blame on her. It's not her
I
responsibility.
didn't place blame on anybody. What I've said is that to come up and create the impression for the board that these things weren't vetted at the appropriate public meeting, whether Ms. Shum meant to create that impression or not, she did, is simply untrue on a number of circumstances. One, on one issue, she missed the fact that it had been covered in multiple branches of government over multiple years. In another case, she missed the fact that it had just been vetted at a public meeting that she chose not to attend 2 weeks ago. And in a third case, she missed the fact that it was raised at a public meeting that she attended and sits on 5 months ago. So I'm not blaming her. She raises a valid point. We could have scheduled the Accountability Commission in a different way, but I think a full body of facts need to be presented, and I don't think was in her testimony.
If I could just make one point of clarification. After the June meeting, I sent to the BESE staff a specific question and asked about us talking about the social studies at the next meeting in October. I was told that it was not going to happen, that it would be coming up at the next meeting. I specifically tried to address that by sending it to BESE staff because that's who holds the Accountability Commission meeting. So I'm simply saying that I tried to address that fact. I thought we would have the meeting, and I think if it's called the Accountability Commission, I have a problem with us spending time on something when all of these policies are so important and it not coming before the commission prior to its adoption. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's not vetted at other meetings. To me, if I'm in the public sector and I want to create a view of transparency, it should be vetted at every public opportunity that there is the opportunity to vet. So if it's vetted at the Superintendent's Advisory, it should go before the Accountability Commission, because to me, the more people that hear about it, the more people that know about it, then the better buy-in we have when the policy comes before BESE. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to share some thoughts. What this highlights is an issue I've shared with you all over time. It's who's taking the tests and how that impacts school performance scores. And I'm Sean Fleming with the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. Y'all know me, but I'm supposed to say that. Thank you. And we know students with disabilities, almost by definition and statistically, do not score well. And so I found it interesting as I was listening to the discussion, 2 points. One on discrimination and violations of civil rights, which I'll get to later, but the other more important one is how different compositions of students are impacting the school performance scores, and how now it's all important because who opted out. Whereas we have a competitive educational environment where kids are being moved around, and that's never been, up until today, that has never really been a concern or addressed. So one, I would just thank y'all for actually looking at it, even though it's not specifically for students with disabilities. It does highlight the issue, because I've seen schools take on a lot of kids from another school who were all failing the test. You're not surprised that the next year that school's score looks pretty dismal. In New Orleans, there was a lot of concerns. There was actually a lawsuit filed, but a lot of concerns for students with disabilities. There was a federal or report, some guy in California, I can find it for you, who did a study on issues going on in New Orleans schools, and a third of the administrators admitted they selectively recruit students. The lawsuit was supposed to have a special ed master who was hired, and that person still has not been done. I think it's 9-10 months out. And I'm just curious, you know, if we're about civil rights and making sure people have access, that's an accessibility issue. And that's what civil rights is about. Ms. Barrios pointed out well. To put it in context, civil rights is not about what the person with the certain class, and disability is one of those classes, chooses to do. It's whether the institution affords them access and the opportunity and does not discriminate against them to access that. And I equate it to, say, a cafeteria or a restaurant. It can have the ramps, it can have menus in Braille, it can have, you know, interpreters with sign language. But if it doesn't have the food that the person with a disability wants to eat, it is not in violation of discrimination. It's just poor taste. And the information I've received from people with disabilities, parents of students with disabilities, and this is confirmed in a report by the Center for Reform in Public Education when they asked the question. They did a report last December, a year ago, and said, why do charter schools tend to not serve students with disabilities? And one of their conclusions was that the standardized tests are very poor indicators of success for students with disabilities. Now, it's not clear what percentage of the students who opted out were students with disabilities, but if it's perceived to be a violation, that they were discriminated against, I would expect this board to take action with OCR and to file a complaint or to find a class and assist them in filing a complaint. And so I'm not sure if that's the next step or where y'all going with the perception of violations of discrimination, but that would, I would think, be the responsibility because y'all know who opted out. It's just a thought.
Thank
you very much.
That ends our public comments. Any other comments from the board members?
I have several comments and concerns, and I share the same concerns as the public, the citizens of Louisiana as well. My first question to you, Superintendent White, with the pertaining to the civil rights issue, have you filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights in regards to your concerns, or do you plan to file a complaint?
No. What I said is I believe you should be concerned about the continuation of this policy. I don't think this policy itself merits a complaint to the Office of Civil Rights. I think we on our state board need to address the question of whether in the long run this kind of policy opens up violation of civil rights.
And I totally agree, but at the same time, if there's a concern, we need to have further investigation to ensure that those individuals are receiving the rights that they deserve. That's the first one, Superintendent White. The second question for you is in regards to the opting out for our parents, and I'm quite sure you know, I'm quite sure you're familiar with FERPA, which does allow parents the right to opt their students out of any type of testing if he or she feels opposed to not wanting their child to take that test, which can be misleading to the community. So I guess my question to you is in regards to the opting out for our parents, what is the overall scope or plan, even if a parent still decide to opt out, and what would be the repercussions for their student moving forward in future testing?
Sorry, what do you mean the repercussions for a student?
If I'm a parent and I say, well, I don't want my child to take this particular test this spring or maybe a year or two from now, meaning maybe the park assessment or whatever the testing may be moving forward. Would there be any repercussions? Would the school be penalized? Would the student be penalized? Would the teacher be penalized? Would evaluations in regards to that matter? Like what would be the repercussions if I decide not to?
As I said, I think the board in the future will have to look at the circumstances that present themselves in the future.
Okay, so I think I would like to offer a substitute motion because there's still some unclarity in regards to this particular item. And I would like to offer a substitute motion to defer this item to the Accountability Commission. I know you said we're on a timeline. I would like to know what is the timeline? When does this have to, you said we were on a timeline. So when is the deadline for the timeline?
The deadline is as soon as possible. This policy is needed to produce scores for this year. Those scores have impact for tens of thousands of families who have choices to make about schools, for programs that schools run to determine whether they're eligible for this federal grant or not. This policy is important to ensuring that we can continue to implement this year's cycle. And if you delay, you're just putting that off.
Okay, so
I think, by the way, that's why. By the way, I think, Ms. Hill,
Is
that's
there-
why the superintendents were here. Superintendent Falk was here supporting the proposal because it's the right thing to do for the school so they can move forward.
I'm not saying that it's the right or wrong thing to do. I'm just saying that there's still some uncertainty and some concerns, even with individuals that serve on the Accountability Commission.
What's your
even
concern with
parents,
the-
and even I'm going to say districts, but even parents that came up and spoke just a few minutes ago, even with the special education disability organization. So I guess to you haven't answered my question. What is the timeline?
I said it's immediately. That's the
Okay,
timeline.
so immediately meaning, is it January the 1st?
No, immediately is
February
the immediate period,
So
December.
today.
Yes.
So today is the day that we have to approve this, is what
Yes.
you're saying? Well, since he couldn't give me a timeline, I would like to do a substitute motion to defer the item to the Accountability Commission Board to at least to be able to look over some of the concerns and to be addressed, because I think that's why they are in place. And then we still have January where we can meet again, and they can be able to have an understanding of what some of the changes may be.
Superintendent White and Dr. Moranti, just to clarify, the test scores, or schools are expected to receive their district scores, letter grades, and schools letter grades and SPS. So this would certainly, if we pass this, it would hinder those results
Yes, ma'am.
being forwarded to schools.
So we have a substitute motion. Do we have a second to that before we discuss?
Yeah, I have a question.
The motion, I heard an opinion. Can we have the motion clarified exactly
Sure.
what the motion is?
Okay, well,
Ms. Hill, would you
yeah,
say
the
that
motion
motion
is,
again?
and I hear Ms. Beebe concerned in regards to the delay of the scores, correct?
Right.
They already been delayed. I mean, this has been a year that school districts have received scores late. And so, for me, my motion would be is to defer the item to the Accountability Commission Board to allow them to look over the concerns that they may have, and maybe those who in the community, the public, may have as well, and then bring it to the January board. And then it can be passed immediately, and then we can move forward. We've already been delayed, so that's my motion.
Do I have a second to that motion? Hearing no second, we have no substitute motion. Let's go back to the original motion, and are there any objections to the original motion?
I object.
Okay,
I have a
good.
comment.
Please let it be noted that there was one objection to that motion. Next item.
Just a comment for clarification. So, the Accountability Commission is going to be meeting on Friday, and is there on the agenda an opportunity to still discuss what we're voting on today, and if there are concerns? I mean, I know it would be at a later board meeting, but is there an opportunity to maybe vet some of the concerns if there are any?
I think we'd be happy to have a discussion of what was passed at BESE on the accountability agenda to, albeit not perfect, but to assuage some of Ms. Shum's concerns.
Okay, because I think the good news is the superintendents feel comfortable with that, and then if that can carry over to the accountability. Have the test score, have the scores actually gone out to parents yet?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so in that being released to the parents, on the opt-outs, was it a 0 on where the test score should have been?
Yeah, it was just a blank form.
Okay.
This is a notice of intent, correct? So there's always 120 days where differences could come up and changes could be made.
Yes, it's an emergency rule, so it's being implemented, but it is on notice of intent.
Thank you. Next item.
Your next item is on page 32, item 5.3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding post-secondary planning for graduating high school seniors. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
So moved by Ms. Buffy, seconded by,
Members, let me just give you a quick background on this policy. We've been holding public forums for the last year on this issue, as you know. Our Jumpstart program and our advanced placement and dual enrollment pathways give kids early access to college and career training courses. What we are seeing, members, however, is that once kids graduate, their ability to afford further career training and further college education is deeply limited, and that this has a real impact, especially on kids coming from low-income homes. Just to give you some sense of this, in 2013, the class of 2013, only 45% of seniors completed their federal financial aid forms. If we were simply to bring that to the national average, we would take off the table $55 million a year that we are leaving on the table in federal financial aid. If every young man and woman that graduated that year were to have completed their FAFSA, they would have won more than $250 million in federal aid that was left on the table. In our state, filling out that form gives you access not only to federal aid and Pell Grants, but also to TOPS. And yet, for kids who don't get a 20 on the ACT, the odds are only 20% that they will even apply for TOPS, even if they're eligible for TOPS Tech. Meaning that is our kids of greatest economic need who are tending to apply the least for state and federal aid. This is a simple policy. It requires that by 2018, kids either, by the time they graduate, apply for financial aid or receive a waiver. Districts can apply for a waiver, parents can apply for a waiver, and we will grant it. But we hope that financial aid becomes the norm rather than the exception in a world where post-secondary degrees are a necessary element, post-secondary education, for competing in the 21st century economy. Parents can fill out the TOPS form, they can fill out the FAFSA. Their parents can send in a waiver, the school district can send in a waiver, so there's plenty of options. We just want it to be a decision that people make, rather than unfortunately what it is too often today, which is some kids do it and some kids never find out about it. We have committed already making $1 million in grants to our public school systems to help support them do this. We also have asked the partnership of organizations like Career Compass, like our fantastic Student Financial Assistance Organization, LOSFA, so that all of the work that's already underway across our state can support our school systems. This should not fall on the shoulders of our professional school counselors alone, nor on our high schools alone. But to give you a sense of the relative financial benefits of this, there are about 15,000 graduating seniors per year that do not complete their financial aid forms. We estimate that it will take school systems roughly 3 hours per young man or woman for a total of 45,000 hours. That's about a total of 30 FTEs. 30 FTEs for a gain of up to $250 million in financial aid every year to our low-income Louisiana kids. We think that's a trade-off worth making. And we thank you so much for your consideration of this policy.
thank you. We have 8 public comments. We have 7 in support, with 4 asking to speak to them and 1 in opposition. So those wishing to speak, would you please come forward? Lucas Spyfogle, Julie Scott, Gus Wales, Ms. Barrios, and Gwen Bankston. Lucas first.
Thank you. My name is Gwen Bankston. I am a retired school counselor for Tangipahoa Parish Schools, and also worked as a manager of counseling services for one of our virtual online schools here in the state. I come to you in support of this recommendation because I can tell you firsthand, I've been in the trenches, I've worked with the students. My passion and compassion for our students and families is here. I can share with you many, many stories of students who basically put all their eggs in the basket for TOPS. and then life hits. That child's graduating senior, as a graduating senior, on the path for TOPS, and reality sets in. It's not an option. We have 45% of our graduating seniors who are only filling out the financial aid, the FAFSA. That's unacceptable because it limits the opportunity, it limits the students' options into post-secondary education. While we have them there at the school, we do the financial aid nights, we call them in, we do the robocalls, we have LOSFA come out and speak to them, but we need to make sure our students are taking advantage of filling out the FAFSA form, having that option available so that they may transition into post-secondary school, whether it be the university, whether it's community college or technical trade school. So I ask that you please approve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lucas.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Lucas Spielfogel, and I'm the Executive Director of the Baton Rouge Youth Coalition, also known as BRIC. The purpose of our organization is to identify high-achieving high school students across EBR, the neighboring parishes, who come from low-income families, and to help them access and excel in college. And not going to add much to what Gwen said, because she really enlightened us and made it very clear that there are numerous obstacles to college access, and one of the obstacles to college access is just sort of the mysticism around it, when in actuality some of the steps, some of the mechanics are quite simple, and the FAFSA is one of those. But it's sort of shrouded in this mystique, and students and parents are sort of fearful of it, even approaching it. And our experience has been, having worked with 285 students in the last 6 years, that when you sort of peel back the layers and just show the parents and students how simple it is, they're not only surprised, but they're very pleasantly, they're not only surprised, but they're very happy when they find out that they're able to access hundreds of billions of dollars in federal aid that the federal government is trying to make available. And it has implications not only for public funding, but also for numerous private scholarship opportunities that are offered through colleges and other scholarship organizations that students have to complete the FAFSA in order to access. So we're not only talking about the federal aid, we're not only talking about TOPS, but we're also talking about literally hundreds of millions more dollars from organizations like the Gates Millennium Scholars Program and many others that our students in EBR and surrounding parishes and across the state can access with just some simple maneuvering of these obstacles out of their way. So I think this is a really easy win for the state, and I'm definitely in support of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Julie Scott.
Good morning. I am Julie Scott with Career Compass of Louisiana. We partner hand in hand with BRIC, and they do work with a lot of students who do go into the university. But what we see as a college access organization in Louisiana is that over 50% of the students, the graduating seniors, don't qualify for TOPS, and those students also need to be accessing the financial aid. We definitely are in support of the students all completing the FAFSA, and know that by working one-on-one with those students, it is a doable task.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Wales.
Yes, I'm Gus Wales. I'm the Director of Public Information for the Louisiana Office of Student Financial Assistance, or LOSFA. I just want to make you aware of some initiatives that are out there that do assist with FAFSA completion. As several speakers have indicated, many families find the FAFSA form to be intimidating. We have an event that has actually been going on for 9 years now in Louisiana. This will be the 9th year coming up, called College Goals Sunday, which is a national initiative to provide free FAFSA completion assistance. LOSFA partners with the Louisiana Association of Financial Aid Administrators to put this event on. It is held on college campuses, I should say post-secondary campuses around the state. We have 19 institutions that are going to participate this year. We will have 2 events, one on Sunday, February 28th, and the other on Sunday, March 6th, the following week. We will have 10 institutions participating on one date and 9 on the other date. The financial aid staffs from the host universities and institutions provide hands-on, line-by-line assistance with FAFSA completion. The events are held in computer labs where the FAFSAs can be completed on site. And we will be promoting this, as we always do, through the high schools and through the media. We encourage you to support this event as well. It's open to the public. There is a concentration on low-income, first-generation families, but we do accept anyone that wants assistance in completing the FAFSA. The other initiative that I want to mention is the FAFSA Completion Project. This is an initiative launched by the U.S. Department of Education. LOSFA has partnered with the U.S. Department of Education in that we will offer school districts the ability to complete a memorandum of understanding with LOSFA, wherein we will share with the school districts the number of students, or the actual names of students who have completed the FAFSA and have not completed the FAFSA in their district. And Mr. Bradford here at Department of Education has the contact information and the links to those memorandums of understanding that your LEAs can complete. And we currently have 25 public LEAs participating, public school districts participating, 8 charter schools and 11 non-public schools. It's open to any districts that want to participate. That way the individual schools can keep track of their students who have and have not completed the FAFSA and encourage them to do so, and it will help you to achieve the goal that Superintendent White has set out.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Lee Barrios. We also have 3 public comment cards, but they said that they did not wish to speak. It's Casey Edwards, Lynn Smith, and Dr. Lisa Vosper.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. It's an excellent concept. Undoubtedly, there are students with different issues who fall through the cracks. This is one of them, I'm sure. But the problem is, or the questions that I would have, and I think it needs to be looked at more, is actual process. It doesn't appear this really has any teeth, because there is an opt-out provision as opposed to an opt-out provision. So you're not saying that a student has to fill out the form. So it seems to me like, and I'd be curious what some of the school superintendents feel like, and I don't think this was presented at SACS. I don't remember it at the last SACS meeting, which I was there. But this is another mandate for local school districts, and it does take time, and it will cost money. And the situation with counselors, they're already overburdened. If we had enough funding for enough counselors other than to administer tests, a lot of these issues would go away. This is probably going to create, there are going to be situations, as there always are when you're dealing with people and with schools, of parents who, for one reason or another, feel like they were left out of this process or something went awry. And so there are liable to be lawsuits. I don't know, questions about that. The national, I'm not sure what organization is, but it's the college entrance people, say that 30% of all students who actually apply for college never show up. So the idea that this is going to radically increase the number of students who actually show up, is it just another effort at paperwork? So I think if you put more focus into improving these public-private partnerships and means through which these students can actually get good counseling other than just filling out a form, I think that's also necessary in this process. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Yes.
Good morning. I'm here representing Louisiana School Counseling Association. My name is Lynn Smith. I'm a senior counselor at Terra High School. They pretty much supported everything that I had to say about the importance of of this consideration. I am a senior counselor. One of my goals every year is to make sure that every senior completes the FAFSA at Terra High School. I make it my business. Is it a lot of paperwork? No, not necessarily. It's a little time that I do take out, because I do know the importance of every senior filling out the FAFSA. I think that we need to have more conversations to the parents. The parents, I think they have just a little fear of sharing personal information, but when I have one-on-one individual consultations with parents, and I explain to them the importance of it and how we are leaving billions of dollars on the table in Louisiana, because we are not students are not filling out the FAFSA. They tend to understand a little bit more, and they also go home and encourage their children to complete the whole process. So I feel that if this is passed, it would give Louisiana a really good push for our students to actually go to the technical colleges, go to any school that can receive the that allows for students to receive FAFSA. I think also we should have the option of opting for parents to opt out if they would like, but I feel that it should be a graduation requirement.
Thank you, Ms. And that ends our public comments. Any comments from the board, Ms.
Thank you. And I just wanted to also point out that we did discuss that the fiscal impact is not going to be a burden on, that's one of the things we were concerned about, that it would not be a fiscal impact to the local school districts. I would like to ask the LASFA representative that's here today, what are your feelings about, are we not succeeding in getting parents to come to these meetings that are supposedly regional? And I'd just like to hear what's happened in the past on that. And what I'm just listening to the discussion, I'm wondering if we could maybe move more to going in directly into the schools rather than say, okay, everybody show up at the Coliseum, because that's a little bit intimidating as well. Thank you. Superintendent, I think too, I believe in discussions, we talked about Compass or others coming in, maybe the wrong group, but coming in to try to assist and maybe a one-on-one, getting more students and their parents to feel comfortable about coming in.
Yes.
And I think logistically, this is a great idea if we can work the logistics to get people to come in and realize that it really is to their best interest to fill out these forms, and to the state.
Agreed.
Ms. Bradford.
I just want to say I'm in support of this motion for all the reasons that have been listed, but I just would be remiss if I did not say thank you to the counselors who came here today, who said, doesn't really cost me anything, doesn't really take more of my time, it's just a little paperwork. It's a lot of time, but that's the attitude of our counselors. And we thank you for coming today. And I just want to say thank you for the job you do. And I think we have a majority that are just so wanting to do the right thing for the kids. and we don't say thank you enough to those counselors. And so I wanted to say thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes,
Yes, Dr. Beebe.
I do know that Ms. Barrios had raised the question about superintendents being made aware, and this information was presented to a superintendent's group. Some concerns were noted regarding the requirement for parents to complete, or students completing the application, and you know, it could be somewhat burdensome because we do have those students and parents. Some are apathetic, and I realize this is the purpose of the policy, and it is to encourage participation, but there is an item 4 that says there is a waiver if the 4 requirements or 4 steps are not adhered to. So Superintendent White, I mean, is it just filling out, completing a form on the part of the district to say, look, these 4 steps were not met or completed?
Yes.
So we appeal to you. Does it come before BESE, or is that just something?
No, I think it will just be in the transcript system.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out that there are students who fall through the cracks. You know, there is, you know, many of them, they lack the maturity, and they don't recognize at the time that they want to go, they want to do post-secondary. And so it's important that we have a process in place, and I know that it is going to create additional work for counselors, but I think it's a positive move, and so I support it.
Thank you, Dr. Bean.
Yes, please.
Going off of what Ms. Smith said, it is really important that the only way that this will work is if you communicate it to the students.
Yeah.
So it's not only our job to make sure that this gets passed, but it's also the schools and the districts individually's job to inform the seniors. But not only the seniors, but start at the junior year. Because I started my college at the beginning of my junior year. I have all my stuff done, but I have friends of mine who don't know what they're doing, and the school is focusing on, so we have IS, but the school is focusing on kind of like preventing fights instead of teaching the seniors how to fill out the FAFSA. A lot of them don't even know that January 1st is when it goes live, or that the schools for financial aid, there's different offices. There's the Office of Financial Aid and there's the Office of Admissions, and so these types of informatives is what students need, and I feel like this motion is great, but it does need to be well communicated, and that's the only way it's going to work.
Thank you. Well, do we have any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
Your next item is on page 35, item 5.4, and contains proposed revisions to 2 bulletins and the BESE code. The consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, the Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, and consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1794, State Textbook Adoption Policy and Procedure Manual. The department recommendation is to approve both as notice of intent. Also, consideration of revisions to Louisiana Administrative Code Title 28. The department recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion? Thank you, Ms. Jones. Do I have a second? Thank you. And
Members, this is simply bringing the textbook policies of our board into line with the legislation. It is fitting that this is the last meeting of this particular board, because for 4 years we've been wrestling with this issue of the fact that the law requires specific things around textbook review that maybe are a little antiquated, and you therefore have had to give us a waiver every year to do a more updated version. Gene Reynolds, representative from Minden, has passed a piece of legislation that the governor signed overhauling the textbook adoption process. It gives parents much greater input at a local level. It maintains textbooks being a local level, but it requires that the state run a review process. It just gets rid of some of the antiquated once every 7 years notion, the caravan that would travel around the state notion, and I think it strikes the right balance between parent control, school system control, and state review. So I thank you for, thank Representative Reynolds, and I thank you for your consideration, but please know this is straight transfer from the statute into the regulation.
Thank you, Superintendent. We have two public comments, Lee Barrios and Mr. Frank Buckley.
Okay, Frank Buckley from New Orleans, textbook adoption. Last year, we adopted Eureka Math, and I was teaching 6th grade in Jefferson Parish, and I went to a 3-day training during the summer with a lot of other math teachers. And as we were going through the training and going through the books, we noticed that there was a lot of wrong answers in the textbook. So we brought it to the attention of the person that was presenting, and she said, okay, underline it, write a note on it, send it to us. And as the more we got into it, the more errors we found. And then she told us if we find any more when the session is over, just write them down and send it to them. So we need to be careful about textbooks, because that was supposed to be the textbook that was going to help the kids with Common Core pass the PARCC test. And you had a lot of wrong answers. It wasn't user-friendly for teachers, students, or parents. So, and to go back to another statement that was made, I'm going to say it again, hopefully this will be my last time, about the cheating. I told John White in 2009 that cheating was going on. I stated that John White said that he wasn't going to check into it. All those are facts. I saw the cheating, I reported. There are facts. It's not an opinion. So when I say that the people in Atlanta, Georgia went to jail for cheating, I'm trying to figure out why John is not even being investigated about cheating or being arrested. So Chaz, and it's not the first time I said this, and you have never heard John White say I'm lying about it. Thank you.
Any other comments from the board?
Just a question.
Yes, Ms. West.
Superintendent, on the textbook adoption, I guess the governing authority may purchase textbooks and other instructional materials through a state contract or through the central depository, or may contract directly with a publisher or other content provider. Does each LEA have the ability or the authority to do that through their local board, and then they post that online for parents to review? I mean, is that the scope and sequence of how it works?
Essentially. Yeah, essentially. I mean, basically in the process of negotiating this piece of legislation, the school systems wanted to make sure they didn't lose their ability to buy from the state contract that gives them greater ability to bulk purchase. At the same time, there is a requirement that locally it be a decision that's made available to parents for their comment. So so they can purchase through the state, but they're required to vet it locally.
Okay, and so with it being updated to everything being online, is that basically what Representative Reynolds' legislation did? It just said we're not going to have mobile travels all over the state. You can go online, look at what is available, and then after local boards make their decision, then it's available for the public to review, or I guess maybe that happens before they make their decision.
They do a review process prior to their decision.
Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. And I want to thank all of those who took the opportunity to give public comment. We appreciate that, and that concludes our agenda.